Hey everyone, welcome back to Daily Stand-Up. In this one, I'm actually just going to walk through what it looks like to set up a basic repository pattern inside of a .NET solution. So this is my engines project that I've been working on for largely the past 8 months, just off and on. But I haven't actually connected to my MySQL workbench yet from this application, just because I had responsibility of querying the DB inside my Rust project. So I felt like it'd be good just to walk through this in this project in case I need it. So I'm going to go ahead and if you've been following along with this project, actually, let me just kind of give you a quick overview of where we're at. So we're using a lot of queues. We're using Mass Transit to connect to those. We have some services wired up. We're using WebSockets to send real-time updates down to our front end. And we just have the general kind of .NET, boilerplate middleware set up. So there's a lot going on here, but we're going to focus specifically on our repository layer and also add services to call those repository layers or methods. And I'm going to show you what that is. So if you're ever in a situation where you have a running database like this here, I have MySQL Workbench running locally. I have one database called two-stroke test, and it's just kind of my testing database that I'm working with. We have a couple tables, engine details, and user engines. I just want to add some methods to get this data. Pretty simple. So this is just all mock data that's being largely used by my Rust microservice, but in this case, I want to query it from .NET. We're going to go ahead and go to back into my .NET solution. And the first thing that you'll notice if you look up repository pattern is you might see some conflicting advice whether or not you should be calling repository pattern or repository methods from your controller. So this is like my experimental controller. I have a lot of stuff that I'm not even using, but I've just set up to basically test some things with, which I think is important. So we're going to go ahead and first add a new endpoint. And this is just going to be a get endpoint. The route is just going to be, what do we want the route to be? Let's just say get engines. And then all this is going to do is going to return the engines. So get engines. And we're just going to return for right now an OK. And an OK is basically a wrapper that returns the status code of HTTP 200. And then you can put in data to basically be wrapped inside that status, and it'll return as JSON. So it's pretty nice. So you'll see some people that'll call the repo method from here. You'll see people also call the service method to then call the repository method like that. Personally, those are two approaches, and then some people don't do any of that and then just literally just query the database from here, which is not advisable. I would say it's not advisable just because you want to keep your controllers kind of as lightweight as possible, just simply because they're kind of like a contract between you and your consumer. And if your consumer is burdened with having to know a lot of logic and business logic inside of your endpoints, it just kind of becomes odd. And it's just a pattern, so you have to have some pattern to do these things. So people have decided to use repository methods and then service methods. I personally am in the most favor of using a service to call the repository, and then the service is going to house all your business logic. And then your repository method is just going to be your query, and that's it. There's going to be zero logic in the actual repository. That way, whatever calls the repository knows that they're going to get exactly what that SQL provides. Whereas if you have logic in the repository that the consumer might not be aware of, they might be getting data back that's filtered that they may not be aware of, which is probably less than advisable. So we're going to set up this way. So we're first going to create our service. So we have a couple services, but I'm just going to create a new do a new file here, empty class, and we're going to call this, I don't know, we'll call it engine service. Engine service. And the first thing I just want to do, just to kind of get some of the boilerplate code out of here, is we're just going to define an interface. So that way we can use dependency injection to inject this into the controller. And we need to define a method here. So we're going to return our engine model, I believe. And Visual Studio is going to tell me to add a reference. So get engines. That's all it's going to do. It's pretty straightforward. And then inside of our actual service, we need to inherit from that, or implement the interface, I should say. So it's going to yell at you until you actually do that. And I don't know the shortcut key on Visual Studio for Mac, so I'm just going to do it manually. And return. We have to obviously call the repo method here. Last thing we need to do is we actually just need to inject. Hold on. Okay, now we're good. We need to inject the repository. So let's go ahead and jump over to repositories, and we're going to create a new file. And we're going to call it engine repository. And again, same thing, empty class. And then the same thing, just get your boilerplate code done. Engine repository. And then this is going to return again enumerable of engine model. And get engines. Okay. All right, and use that. And same thing. We got to, oops, put that out of our class. All right, let's implement our interface. And then let's go ahead and implement the method here on the bottom. Okay, so this is actually going to call our, this is actually going to query the database. So database, okay. All right, so at some point along the line, you're going to be faced with a couple questions that you need to answer. One of the questions is that how are you getting your connection to the database? And also how you actually are going to query the database. If you're in .NET, you might be tempted to use Entity Framework. An Entity Framework is pretty good in the right circumstances if you're aware of the configuration to make it performant. A lot of times it's convenient to see the actual raw SQL, and you just need something really lightweight. You don't need all the background configuration of Entity Framework, especially if you already have your models defined and you're already working with them, like in my case. Dapper is a pretty good solution, and it's very fast. There's nothing fancy that really happens, which is nice. So we're going to use Dapper, and we're going to go ahead and install those packages. So I got to find where new NuGet is in Visual Studio for Mac. I usually use Rider. That's why I'm like, I use Rider for work, so I just have it on my personal laptop. So I'm going to put in Dapper. So if you search for Dapper, we're going to go ahead and install two things. So we're going to go and install this Dapper, and we're also going to look for the Dapper for MySQL. Actually, we might not. I forget if you need that or not. I can never remember that. I think you're good with that. Whoops, I lost it. I think you're good with just Dapper. Let's go ahead and install that. I think it's latest stable. Okay. I have one project. Let's go ahead and add that in. So we have Dapper. But before we do that, we have to add the connection string to our database. And for me personally, I just like to keep everything really simple. Some people nest this into connection string, but honestly, I'm just going to put this for now. Um, I'm just going to add a MySQL uh, actually, what is my database called? Two-stroke test. All right, I guess I'm calling it that. Two-stroke test DB connection. I like to do it all uppercase just because I don't know, I'm that way. And then we do need a connection string. And if you go to any docs, you can just get the connection string format for MySQL. Oh my goodness. I don't know what I copied. Oh boy, hold on. I just want this. Excuse me. So if we go to my server, now we got to get some information about where we're running server. Please close connection. Might need to. If you go here, you should be able to edit connection, and it should show you all the stuff you need. Host name, that's what we need. 33 server is just this. I don't know if it requires the host. I'm not sure. I forget. I think I left everything just as my username, root. Yeah. I don't actually know what the password is. It might be root. I have no idea. And my database name. Close that. Oh boy. Hold on a second. Um, okay. It's just root. So by default, when you run SQL Server or MySQL, you're gonna get root. Let's get rid of these spaces. I don't know if I need the port. I'm not sure. I'll put the port in there, I guess. It should be 3306. We might not need that. I always forget. So we have a connection string now, and you can see that I put it in the app settings folder. I didn't choose to put in app settings development just because we haven't deployed it. And so if we put it in app settings, it's the same thing. Development is just like an override of app settings that just runs in your development environment, which in this case is locally. If we deploy it, we can set it up in our pipeline to override this string with a new connection string. And we can do that in a later video. And I'll show you how to do that. I don't know what's going to happen with these spaces. That one's telling me to use. Okay, I guess I'll leave the spaces in, at least on that part. All right, so we have our connection string, and it's in the configuration. Now, depending on what your application is, and this is kind of up to you, depending on how many databases you're working with, for me, it's only one, this two-stroke test database. If you're working with multiple databases, it's probably going to be beneficial for you to create a factory method to create connections kind of on the fly to whatever database you need. Because if you go into your program file, you can register a connection here in the middleware or in your service activation to that. Here, I can show you what I'm talking about. Some people suggest doing this. I do need my super connection package. That's what I was forgetting. Some people do this right in the build pipeline. We're going to do it in a factory, and I'll show you how. Basically, why I like to move it off of the build pipeline here, or the startup pipeline, is because that'll limit you to only getting one connection to a single database. But if you have multiple databases in a project, putting inside a factory and then providing the connection string will be beneficial because you can call the same method to build that connection. So we got to add one more project in. Also, am I still recording? Hopefully I am. Yeah. All right. So if we go ahead and manage NuGet packages, we need MySQL connection. That's what I was forgetting. Okay. MySQL connection. There's a bunch of these different connection libraries. It's really database dependent. MySQL connection. I forget though if I always forget because I use there's a couple different ones to do. I might just stick with this one today. You can try some other ones out though. This one seems pretty. This one seems fine for. Oh my goodness. This one seems fine for today. We'll install it. Again, you kind of have to test these libraries out and see which one works. This is probably just a wrapper over MySQL anyway. So, but just use use like a respected one. Do your own research on it though. I wouldn't just follow one tutorial, but for the sake of this video, we're just going to use this. So we go into our, let's see, got that. What is this called? MySQL connection. Okay, that's what I just need to know what the object's called. I don't know if I've used MySQL connector specifically before. Let me just put something here. Okay, should be good with that. And what this class is going to be responsible for is actually building the connection. So if we go ahead and I'm not going to make the interface right now. Let's just we need to see what the return type is. Public void. Let's say build DB connection, and we need MySQL connection. So okay, it's literally just MySQL data, MySQL client. Okay, sounds good. And we want to return using var connection. Return new MySQL connection. Okay. Let's just do this. New MySQL connection. All right. And we're going to pass a string connection, and we're going to pass it in there. And we want to return this here. So now we have our method signature that I think we're going to need. And this may just look like another abstraction that you don't need. And it's definitely up to you. But if you work with multiple databases, you'll notice over time that you might have some options that are available in one database that aren't in another. For example, if you have a database that has read replicas, you have to introduce whether you want to use that or not somewhere. And these kind of methods allow you to add that in and not be database specific. And also this, like, you can set up if you want to use a retry in here, which is pretty nice. We'll have to activate that switch if we want to implement retries in .NET, but for right now, we're not going to. So we have this build DB connection that accepts a connection string and then returns a new MySQL connection. And the key to note with this is we need to use this inside of the using, because we need to dispose of the resources once we've used it. So if we go ahead and copy and paste or copy this IDB connection factory, we need to put it in our service registration. So we need to say builder services, and we're going to go ahead and add transient, because transient dependencies basically create a new dependency per call of that object. Scoped creates one per HTTP request. But since we want to create and destroy connections every time, we don't want that reference hanging around. So we want to add transient, and then we're going to go ahead and pass in the actual concrete implementation, and we're going to go ahead and do. We're going to go ahead and do that thing. Hold on. Oops. What do I do here? Can I do? Oops. I need to go back to my. I forgot to inherit from DB connection. I always do that. I always forget to inherit from interfaces. And that kind of is indicative of like programming in the wrong way. I mean, you're supposed to do your interfaces, but sometimes when you're just doing stuff like this, you just forget to. All right, so that's registered. So now we have access to hopefully a ability to create a new connection. The next thing we need to do is inside of our repository, we need to go ahead and one, inject that DB connection factory, but also get the connection string that we need. So what we're going to do is we're just going to create a new private read-only field. And we're going to call it IDB connection factory. Connection factory. All right, and oops, we're going to inject that with dependency injection, and we're just using the we're just using the, oh, I'm just doing video. Yeah, I'm just wrapping this up. Hey, can I have one of those? Like, thanks. All right, so if we have IDB connection, let's put that in the constructor, and let's add the reference. Okay. Next thing we need to do is, and this is up to you, but we need to get the connection string. And there's a couple of different ways. I mean, you could. We need to. Let's see. Hold on. We need to get the configuration in here. So let's just do config. Sure. All right. Then let's add into our constructor. Hold on. Configuration, config, and then and then set config equal to config. Okay. Oops. Type. Hold on, boys. Here we go. All right. So we got config created and config. What we're going to do is, again, this is kind of opinionated stuff, but we can set our well, first we have to get the connection. From the configuration. So basically if we do config I just need to, oops, come on. I need to see what I called that. Okay. And let's go back and get the, oops. All right, should be good. So basically what we're doing here is we're saying, okay, go out and get me this configuration string or this connection string from this app settings.json file. And .NET handles that with the iConfiguration abstraction. So the configuration basically just grants you access to your app settings. And why that's important is because when you deploy these applications, you're going to have different environments. You're going to have your development environment, your QA environment, or your stage, whatever you call it, and your production environment, most likely. And each of those presumably are going to have different values that you're going to need to get. Your staging environment is going to have a different database than your production environment. And as you deploy these through whatever pipeline you're using, you need to substitute these values for something else. And there's a number of ways to do that. It's largely dependent on how your application is deployed. If you're using GitHub Actions, there's actions that you can replace your app settings with values that have been fetched from either the GitHub's environment variables, secrets, wherever you have those. But as it's going through the pipeline, these are going to be substituted. And obviously, they're not nothing. It's not set up to do that currently, but I'm just explaining why configuration is important. And that's a whole large topic in and of itself that we can go into later. But basically, once we have our connection factory available to us, we're going to go ahead and add a using. Is this going to give us? Nope. Connection equals DB connection factory, and we're going to pass in build a DB connection, and we're going to pass in our string that we just got. So you can see here that we have an open connection now. I think hopefully this opens it when some of these require you have to do open. Should be good. So once we have an open connection to the correct database that we want, we now have access to, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Hold on. I put that in the wrong spot. What am I looking at? I was looking at the, piece. Remember that. Never using that. All right, so now we got the connection string. We pass that into here. It's going to tell you it might be null. We're just going to ignore that for now. And then we're going to wrap this in a try catch. And here's where we want to implement our query. So add query using Dapper. Basically now we have our connection. So connection dot, and you can put this inside your try. We'll put that inside of our try, depending on where you want your error handling to be. I'm just going to call this connection. And then here's where we need Dapper. MySQL connection does not contain it, but Dapper does. So we're going to use Dapper. Dapper allows you to just basically execute raw SQL. And we're going to, now that we have our Dapper, we have all these methods here. We're going to use the async one. And this is going to be engine model. because that's where we're going to be beginning. And then it expects just raw SQL, which is really nice. So we can just do var SQL equals something, and then we can pass in our SQL here, and we can go ahead and you can put this as a however you want to do this, but just hold on. We gotta make this a async method that returns a task. Let's just get that. All right. You can return the connection. You can just do a return on this, but because I want to step through this in code, I'm just going to make this its own variable, so that way you can place a breakpoint here and just show you what's happening as we're walking through. So what we're going to do here is actually just write SQL, which is super nice. So we're going to do select just see if I can copy something real quick. Let me just make sure that okay, I think we should be good. And I need to get to here, and here's what I want. So if we execute this, you can see that, oh, actually, no, I want this one right here. I want to get the engine details, which I think is my engine model. I'm pretty sure. Hopefully that's up to date. But watch this. We're just going to go here and copy and paste that SQL. And that's literally it. So what we're saying is select star from our table, our database, and our table. So super nice. Can't really you can't really beat that. We're going to go ahead and execute that SQL, run that, return this result, and go ahead and this is the part that you kind of have to decide how you want to handle this. You can have this, for me, just because I don't want to handle all the logic right now, I'm just going to return a new list of engine model. I'm just going to return an empty list and have it do nothing. So let's go ahead and get back out of there. So let me explain some things here. So we have a open connection. We built a DB connection. It's going to dispose of it because it's wrapped in the using. And we have raw SQL. We have a connection that we can query against our database using that SQL. And we're going to return that. So that works really, really well. So just not let hold on. Oh, whenever you make it async, it always adds async to the method name, which we don't necessarily want that much. Get engines. What is it telling me now? Oh my goodness. Hold on. All right, make that public. All right, so once we have that repository method implemented, we can go back into our program CS file, and we're going to add this to our dependency injection. So let's go ahead and add after here, and add. We are going to add this as a scope dependency. DB, engine repository. Let's add it there. And last thing we need to do is go into our services. So our engine service, we're going to call that repository. So first we have to inject it into our service. So private read only engine repository. And add our reference engine repository. We're going to go ahead and add it to the constructor. And Once that's added, we should be able to call our repository and engines. We do have to await that. And I do want this to be async, so I'm going to go ahead and make this a task. And I need to update my signature, make it fast. If you're working in newer versions of C# too, you can mark your interfaces as with modifiers, so you can do public async in the actual interface. I think I don't know what version. Actually, what version am I on? Oh, you have to. Oh, that's right. You have to define the implementation too. If you're on newer versions of C#, you can actually define. You can pretty much make this an abstract class, your interface, which makes it even more gray between the true difference between a abstract class and an interface sometimes. So we're going to go ahead and return that from here. So let's go back. We need to add our service in our dependency injection. So we're going to go ahead and add a scoped service, engine service, engine service here. Now we added that to dependency injection. So if we come over to our home controller, let's go ahead and call that service. So we just have to add it here. Engine service. I'm going to explain a lot of this, I think, once we get all this code out of the way. It feels like a lot, but once you get it all set up, it's really, really nice. So once we get engine service here and engine service, okay. We added those to dependency injection. We injected it into our controller. So now we should be able to call that from here, get engines, and then we're going to return our result. All right. So we've added our service, we added our connection factory, and we've added our repository. I think everything's correct, but we'll find out.